The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This is The Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, get in the zone. It's The Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. Well, all anyone wants to talk about this week, of course, are the disparities between the arrest of former FBI Director James Comey and me. Strangely enough, I think most Americans remember that fateful morning when 29 heavily armed FBI agents arrived at my home in 17 armored vehicles. They were wearing night goggles as night turned to day. They were brandishing fully automatic M4 assault weapons. They had a battering ram with them, as well as some extraordinarily vicious-looking dogs. They also pulled up in 2 amphibious units, because I lived on a canal at that time, and a full complement of FBI agents in frogmen operations outfits, I guess, fully armed, jumped out on the dock. It was a $1.1 million taxpayer-funded extravaganza, all for the benefit of CNN. In the case of James Comey, he hasn't even turned himself in yet. In fact, he has until October 9th until he voluntarily does so. Now, this is particularly interesting because James Comey and I were both charged essentially with the exact same crimes, lying under oath to Congress and obstruction of an official proceeding. Now, some critics point out that I was charged also with witness tampering, but frankly, the evidence of that, an email in which I threatened to take a government witness, Randy Credico's dog, away from him, was nonsense because, well, Judge Amy Berman Jackson would not allow my attorneys to enter into evidence a series of emails that would have put that into context, in which I expressed my concern that Credico wasn't feeding his dogs, opting, I think, to spend his money on drugs instead of the dog. Damn clever, those Weissman prosecutors. But the over-the-top raid on my home at 6 o'clock in the morning, given my lack of any previous criminal record and the fact that I didn't have a valid passport and didn't own a firearm, was a raid that was staged for theatrics, for the optics. I would learn later from an FBI agent in the Miami bureau that taxpayers paid a whopping $1.1 million for this extravaganza. Normally, in the case of a first-time nonviolent crime by someone with no previous record, a defendant's lawyer would be informed that his client was being charged, and he would simply turn himself in a prearranged time and place. Had I been informed of that, I certainly would have done so. But the FBI claimed that I had to be arrested in the stunning made-for-television stunt that they put together, simply because I was a flight risk. That's an absurdity, of course, because they knew I had no valid passport, and that I'm instantly identifiable. The whole thing was staged for the benefit of CNN. Once again, I was arrested at 6:06, and at 6:22, Sarah Murray, a particularly vile woman, with CNN, contacted my lawyer, Grant Smith, to send him a draft of my criminal indictment, a draft that was sealed, a draft that was not released until 10:30 that morning. The fact that they said I had to be arrested in the surprised manner I was because I was a flight risk, but also they claimed that if I had known in advance, I might destroy evidence, which is laughable because they had gone to 2 federal judges claiming that they had probable cause to charge me with treason, conspiracy against the United States, counterfeiting, money laundering, wire fraud, aiding and abetting before and after a felony, and unauthorized access to a government computer. course, they never found any evidence of those crimes. Having gone through all of my emails, all of my text messages, all of my documents, they tore my house apart in a 13-hour search, leaving it a shambles. But literally nothing they found was used in the trial against me. Now, people are surprised when they learn that CNN actually won an award from the White House Correspondents Association for their incisive investigative reporting, which led them to stake out my home in the pre-dawn hours of the day of my arrest. Actually, I got an inkling that they were coming because the same Sarah Murray contacted me at 4:00 p.m. the afternoon before I was arrested to ask for my address. It was then that I said to my wife, they're coming to arrest me tomorrow morning. And she said, well, you've been saying that for months. I said, no, this time I'm absolutely sure. What's interesting is, since I knew they were coming, I set my alarm for 5 a.m. I got up, showered, put on my Roger Stone Did Nothing Wrong t-shirt, because product placement is everything. And I was sitting in the upstairs window of the bathroom of my home, which was the only vantage from which you could see the entire front yard. And therefore, I can tell you that the so-called stakeout by CNN lasted approximately 15 minutes, meaning the CNN camera crew drove up and set up in front of my house prior to the FBI arranging. A stakeout is when you sit in a place for hours waiting for something to happen. This wasn't a stakeout. This was a set-up. Now, interestingly enough, when you looked at the draft of my indictment that CNN clearly had in advance of my arrest, it had no timestamps or court markings on it. Therefore, CNN's claim later that they got it online is just another egregious lie. But if you look at the metadata tags of the document, you see the initials of the man who wrote it, therefore the man who leaked it. That would be corrupt prosecutor Andrew Weissman, the de facto head of the Mueller investigation. By the way, the leak of a search or arrest warrant or any grand jury material, including a draft of an indictment prior to its being executed or unsealed, is a felony under 18 U.S. Code 401C. My judge raised that. My lawyers raised it with the judge who, quite frankly, could care less. My case also differs a lot from James Comey in that Judge Amy Berman Jackson placed a broad gag order on me, claiming that any public comments I made defending myself could taint the jury pool, a claim for which, of course, she never produced any evidence. In fact, her gag order was so broad, she also extended it to members of my family, meaning my wife, my adult children could not speak out on my behalf. Very clearly unconstitutional. Why then, if the gag order was put on me because it would taint the jury, did the judge unconstitutionally leave it on me after I was convicted and then prior to my being sentenced, and even after I was sentenced while awaiting incarceration? The idea was to silence me because I continued to point out that the FBI admitted in the pretrial motions in my case that they had never examined the computer servers at the Democrat National Committee. Now, my critics argue that I was gagged because I had posted an image of Judge Amy Berman Jackson in one of my legal defense fund solicitations online that depicted a rifle crosshairs over the judge's face. This, by the way, is entirely untrue. The sentencing recommendation of the prosecutors later, however, would actually include extra time for me because I had threatened to kill a federal judge. That was also false. In fact, on February 18th, 2019, I did post a graphic of Judge Amy Berman Jackson on my Instagram feed that had, in the upper left corner, the logo of the organization that created it, Corruption Central. Then some reporter at BuzzFeed, who obviously has never held a rifle with a scope in his or her life, decided that this tiny logo looked like the crosshairs of a rifle, and then accused me of threatening to kill the judge. I did nothing of the kind. But once this false narrative took off like a rocket in the fake news media, the facts and the truth were indiscernible. Lost in the immediate fake news feeding frenzy is the fact that this same logo appears in the same place on other images of individuals that this organization, Corruption Central, had publicly criticized, including Mark Zuckerberg, Kamala Harris, and others. Even when I produced an affidavit that I obtained from the graphic artist who had designed the microscopically tiny image in the upper left-hand corner of the photo of the judge, who insisted that his artistic design was based on a Celtic cross and was not a rifle and was the logo of an ongoing organization, and that he had published many such images, that did not quell the firestorm. So by the time the fake news media conflagration was over, this story, Roger Stone posted a picture of the judge with the crosshairs over her face to threaten her, became a fact. I have posted that image online today so people can make their own decisions. Judge Amy Berman Jackson then ordered U.S. Marshals to conduct an investigation as to whether I had threatened to kill her, an absurd idea, and they themselves, in fact, came back empty-handed. Nonetheless, the prosecutors in my case demanded additional jail time based on this claim in their sentencing memorandum, despite the fact that I was neither charged nor convicted of any such crime. My Instagram post did, however, expose that Mueller's legal trickery to ensure that I was tried before this particular judge, who had viciously violated the constitutional rights of Paul Manafort by incarcerating him in solitary confinement long before he'd ever been convicted of a crime. Mueller's thugs insisted that I had to be tried in front of Judge Jackson because my case was related to the case they had filed against 17 Russians, who they claimed had hacked the DNC. That case never went to trial. No discovery was ever produced to support that fact. In fact, prosecutors promised the judge that they would produce evidence gleaned against me from search warrants in that case. Of course, they never did so because no such evidence exists. Mueller's hit squad was allowed to judge shop based on a lie. Jackson, who had dismissed the wrongful death case brought by against Hillary Clinton by the families of the men killed in Benghazi, regularly attacked President Trump and me from the bench during my trial. Tucker Carlson rightly called her a left-wing Democrat in a robe. I have a signed affidavit from a juror in my case who also swore that Judge Jackson visited the jury room during deliberations when the jury was undecided on one count. This is, of course, enough to taint my entire trial and would, if proven, lead to the impeachment of a federal judge. In a 55-minute harangue at my sentencing, an unhinged Judge Amy Berman Jackson said, "You were convicted of covering up for Donald Trump," to which I now say, covering up what? With the recent declassification of Russian collusion hoax documents by the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, it is very clear that there was nothing to cover up, that I had no motive to lie. I'm Roger Stone. You're tuned in to the Stone Zone. I'm going to continue to talk about the difference between my case and that of FBI Director James Comey when we come back, because there is no better example of the two-tier justice system as it operated in the days of Obama and Biden, and to some extent the same way it operates today. Don't go away.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This is the Stone Zone. Now, get in the zone. It's the Stone Zone.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone. Where's Roger Stone?
Here's Roger Stone.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. On Sunday, President Donald Trump announced that 300 National Guard troops would be sent from California to Oregon in defiance of a federal court order temporarily blocking the president from making this very move. This move comes as Antifa terrorists target ICE facilities in Portland with sustained violence as police are ordered by left-wing city leaders to look the other way. A White House spokesperson said of the move, President Trump exercised his lawful authority to protect federal assets and personnel in Portland following violent riots and attacks on law enforcement. President Trump will not turn a blind eye to lawlessness plaguing America's city. This is yet the latest example of judicial tyranny. It is the last line of defense of the lobby corrupt system as they try to stop Donald Trump from enforcing his legal rights and authority to deport dangerous, illegal immigrant criminals. California is another hotbed. We've seen this in Los Angeles. Chicago is soon to be ground zero of this very, very thing. Joining us very shortly, Mark Vargas, the editor and publisher of the Illinois Review, will bring us up to date on what's going on in Chicago, where the president seems intent to once again use the National Guard to preserve order. In the case of California, Governor Gavin Newsom said he would be filing lawsuits against the Trump administration over the deployment of the National Guard. The Democrats, it seems to me, will do anything in their power to prevent ICE from deporting illegal immigrants. This has nothing to do with humanitarian concerns. It has everything to do with their attempts to change the demographics in America and to put into place a permanent voting bloc from the third world who will vote for Democrats and socialism in perpetuity. If the courts stand in the way of President Trump restoring the rule of law in cities like Portland, Chicago, Seattle, Washington, D.C., and other Democrat-run hellscapes, President Trump should take a page from one of his favorite presidents, Andrew Jackson, and defy the courts. America must not die because some out-of-touch lawyer wearing robes was too craven to do what is necessary to save this country. President Trump is the right leader at the right time to stand up to the radical left and their functionaries within the system. But history is repeating itself. Just as President Richard Nixon had to fight the Weather Underground, the People's Liberation Army, and the Black Panthers. Today, Donald Trump realizes that Antifa and Black Lives Matter are committed to American civil war, and they intend to unleash mayhem, death, and violence across the land. America is at war, but we have a wartime president. Donald Trump will not make the mistake he made in his first term when these same entities were burning down half the country. First, he will defund those financing this terrorist regime, this terrorist effort to destroy our country, and then he will use the National Guard and law enforcement to protect the people. It is the first responsibility of the President of the United States to maintain order and protect American citizens. We'll talk to Mark Vargas with the Illinois Review about what's going on in Chicago, so please don't touch that dial because, well, we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This is The Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
People love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, get in the zone. It's The Stone Zone. Here's Roger Stone.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. Joining us from Ground Zero, that seems to me to be a national insurrection by the radical left who object to President Donald Trump's mandate to deport dangerous, illegal, violent criminals, is Mark Vargas. Mark Vargas is the editor and publisher of the Illinois Review. He has been chronicling what's going on on the ground in Chicago. There has been speculation for weeks that President Trump would mobilize the National Guard to restore order in the Windy City. J.B. Pritzker, the Democrat governor and Brandon Johnson, the Democrat mayor, have resisted that, insisting everything is fine in Chicago, which anybody who can watch television knows that is not the case. But Saturday, you had a particularly alarming situation when police officers were reportedly ordered to stand down and not assist ICE agents who were surrounded and in distress and under attack in the city's Brighton Park neighborhood. Mark, tell us what's going on here.
Well, Roger, it is a shocking scenario that unfolded over the weekend. By the way, 30 shot, 5 killed. But here you have an ICE agent surrounded by very violent and dangerous protesters. What does he do? He naturally calls for backup. And you can tell in the transcripts that there's mass confusion because the police are ready to respond, the Chicago police, and then they're being told to stand down. And then the police officer goes, wait a second, we're not sending ? And the dispatcher replies, again, those are the orders we've been given per the chief of patrol. All CB resources are to clear from the scene. What a frightening scenario playing out in real time. Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson's executive orders signed last year and this past August prohibiting local law enforcement from assisting federal ICE agents. Well, we saw this play out in real time over the weekend, and as a result, the ICE agents' lives were in grave danger.
Let's listen to Mayor Brandon Johnson. He has a different interpretation of what's going on.
The right wing in this country wants a rematch of the Civil War. I want that to sit in right now because the President of the United States of America has declared war on the people of Chicago and people across America.
That was Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago. This is really extraordinary. I would argue, and I'm not a lawyer, but I would argue that both Pritzker and Johnson have legal liability here. They are interfering with federal agents in the exercise of their responsibilities and their duties. What do you think, Mark?
There are, and Roger, I've spoken to legal experts, both Republican and Democrats in Chicago and in Washington, D.C., and they've all reached the same conclusions, that both Pritzker and Johnson have opened themselves to a massive legal battle as a result of their executive orders that resulted in a federal ICE officer's life being in grave danger. There's two different implications. There's several state statutes where both the governor and the mayor are in violation. There are also federal issues, and all it takes is for Congress to call for a federal investigation or for the U.S. Justice Department to call for a federal investigation. And it's right there in black and white, these blatant violations via executive orders that have left federal agents' lives in grave danger.
What I guess I don't understand is where is this constituency for the actions of Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson? Do they actually think that the voters of Chicago, the citizens of Chicago, feel safe in their neighborhoods, that there is no issue, or that they think that illegals should stay in the country, taking jobs that would normally be given to Americans, soaking up social services that would normally be funding American taxpayers? I don't recognize this Democrat Party.
The strategy is pretty simple in my mind, Roger. It's trying to bring in more Democratic voters because they've lost a lot of voters over the last 5 years who've fled to your state now, Florida, to Texas, to red states. So they've lost a lot of voters, millions of voters over the last 5 years. But this is a governor and mayor that have welcomed over 52,000 migrants, many of them dangerous with criminal records and criminal histories, with open arms. Chicago has catered to them. They've spent $3.5 billion to make sure they have food, shelter, clothing, health care. There's been a directive at the Chicago Public Schools that you must give migrant children all passing grades. They've created a system where the migrants are victimized and the law-abiding citizens who are actually residents of this country, the greatest country on the planet, that they are the criminals. But they don't have support. Mayor Johnson has a 6% approval rating, And what I've been told by Democratic operatives over the weekend in downtown Chicago who are collecting petition signatures to get Democratic candidates on the ballot, particularly in the black communities in the South and West Side, that they're having trouble getting residents to sign the petitions for Democrats, that their party is imploding not only locally but nationally. And this issue of supporting illegals over everyday residents is pushing the black and brown community over the edge.
I'm kind of curious as to the impact in the Chicago suburbs. Illinois was always a swing state. Republicans do extremely well downstate, solidly red South Illinois. But then the Democrats always score big in the city of Chicago, where the Cook County machine delivers a big vote. And the suburbs, which used to lean Republican over time, became increasingly Democratic, changing Illinois from being a swing state to being a solidly blue state. If the city itself is impacted by this, I think, crazy policy, the suburbs should also be impacting, meaning if Pritzker and Johnson are successful, they may be successful in putting Illinois in play in not only the upcoming midterm elections, but also in a presidential election.
That's a fantastic question, and you're absolutely right. What's happened is that a lot of these migrants have been bussed out into the suburbs. They've been given train tickets to go out into the suburbs. And so here in these communities where they do prefer law and order, where these migrants are getting off trains and buses wearing ankle monitors, this has been well documented in videos and photos by suburban families capturing all of this. And they're upset because the lawlessness in Chicago has found its way into the Chicagoland suburbs. And so what I think what Pritzker and Johnson are doing collectively is to create even more widespread support for President Trump and his law and order message and policy of making American cities safe again, including Chicago. And again, I think we're seeing that in some of these Democratic wards in downtown Chicago that refuse to sign petitions for local Democratic candidates. People are fed up. They're standing up. And the more Pritzker and Johnson stand in front of a camera, the more foolish they look.
Evidently, Pritzker thinks that he can mount a presidential campaign on the basis of this issue. I don't think that's going to work. I'm just perplexed. Politicians, generally speaking, are incredibly practical people. What they believe in is getting elected and doing whatever they need to do to get elected. It's one of the sad things about our political system. In this case, I just, whether it is transgenderism or whether it is men playing in women's sports or whether it is support and funding for health care for illegals, I just don't see the constituency that they're seeking to capture. I don't think those votes exist. So I guess what I think is that Pritzker and Johnson, and boy, he's a piece of work. If his IQ is 1 point lower, you'd have to water him like a plant. As I pointed out to you, Mark, not that long ago, a month and a half ago, he said all of the problems of rising crime in the city of Chicago were the fault of Richard Nixon, who's been dead for over 40 years. I'm still trying to figure out what he meant by that. But I think they're going to get a realignment, but it's not the realignment that they are looking for. Mark, your reaction to the fact that in Oregon, a federal judge, Judge Emmergut, has ruled that now, yet again today, that President Donald Trump does not have the authority to send National Guard troops into Portland, which is getting increasingly violent and increasingly dangerous.
Roger, I was in Baghdad 14 times as a civilian. I know what a war zone looks like. It's clear that Portland is a war zone, and there is total chaos in the streets. There was a statistic that caught my attention this year in Portland. They've seen an 80% increase in kidnappings. That's right, 80% increase in kidnappings just in this year alone. But you look no further than what happened just a couple of months ago in Portland, Roger, where you had Antifa, and Portland, by the way, is known as the birthplace of Antifa. You can look it up. But Antifa terrorists use zip ties and plywood to try and trap ICE agents in a facility and then set it on fire in hopes that they burn alive. It's well documented. Happened just a couple of months ago. They were not arrested, but they were in possession of zip ties. I can't think of anything more vile and violent than trying to burn federal ICE agents in a building, burn them alive, and yet the Democratic mayor and the Democratic governor say there's no problem here. What we've seen unfold over the last couple of days with Nick Sorter, independent journalist who was arrested. We see the police cooperating with Antifa. We see these Antifa terrorists terrorizing the street, terrorizing the community. The locals are saying send in the National Guard, but yet the Democrats say, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?
Yeah, it's really extraordinary. I watched a shocking video this weekend of a Trump supporter just randomly walking down the street being shot in the head by someone in Antifa. I mean, it really, it kind of proves everything that you say. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but this was all described by John Podesta in the so-called Podesta Plan. And I think once they realized, when I say they, I mean those on the left, that they could not steal the last election. Then they realized that they could not use judicial tyranny because one by one the U.S. Supreme Court overruled these local judges who tried to stop the mandate that the American people voted for in the last election. And now they are very clearly resorting to violence. And I think this is planned. I think it's coordinated. I think it is going to get worse before it gets better. And I notice that the president and other federal officials are increasingly using the word insurrection. To me, that is a tip-off that President Trump may, if things get bad enough, which is, I think, likely, he's going to enact his authority under the Insurrection Act to take control and to put down this insurrection. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. Again, the fact that you've got Antifa trying to burn federal agents alive in a building using zip ties and plywood and trying to drill it into the walls, that is vile. The fact that you've got the very dangerous rhetoric coming from Democrats about the ICE agents trying to rid community as very vicious and dangerous migrants who are here illegally, sexual predators, murderers, rapists. You've got Tim Waltz, the great Tim Waltz, the female cheerleader, calling it a modern-day Gestapo. You've got Robin Kelly calling it a betrayal. Jasmine Crockett calling the ICE agents a slave patrol. This type of rhetoric is what is putting ICE agents and National Guard members and everyday patriots, their lives in grave danger.
Yeah, it is. I think unfortunately, a harbinger for civil war, which is not what we wish for. But I think the American left, they cannot live with the fact that Donald Trump won the last election. They can't live with the fact that he carried every swing state. They cannot live with the fact that he actually carried the popular vote, the first Republican in recent memory to do so. And the American people have voted for wholesale change. So now they will thwart that change. All right. We're talking to Mark Vargas with the Illinois Review, and, we'll be right back.
This is the Stone Zone with Roger Stone.
He likes politics and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone. Where's Roger?
The Stone Zone. Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Concerns of the Mexicans, and how are they adjusting to the new presidency of Donald Trump?
Well, that's a great question, Roger. And one of the things that I learned very quickly in Mexico, in meeting with various trade associations, is that they want to push back China as well, because China's influence is trying to expand in Mexico. So one of the things that we agree on is shrinking China's footprint. They want to control the auto parts industry. They want to control the pharmaceutical industry. They want to control the cattle industry. They want to control as much land as they possibly can. But what's important coming up next year is the renegotiation of the USMCA 2.0. And they're hoping that the President Trump's administration is willing to work with them and expand the manufacturing footprint in North America, where we can find cheaper labor, skilled labor in Mexico, and yet push away China. That is our common enemy. And so I think under President Trump's leadership, he's already made it clear that China is our enemy, and I think that we're going to be in a good position to renegotiate the USMCA in a way that benefits North America and is a type of agreement where both Shanghai and Berlin lose and North America wins.
Yeah, that's a refreshing idea, a trade agreement where both trade partners benefit, which has certainly not been the case prior to Donald Trump becoming president. All of the mainstream economists, all of them said that his insistence on renegotiating all of these tariff deals to be more beneficial to the United States was going to cause runaway inflation, outrageous spikes in unemployment, the crash of the stock market. Of course, they've been wrong about all of it. The month of June was the first time in 15 years that we've actually ran a surplus for the month, meaning the government took in more money than it paid out. The truth is that the president's economic policies, even without that, the full rate cut by the Federal Reserve, which I think the current level of unemployment and inflation merit, his economic policies already incredibly successful in recharging the economy, and a renegotiated agreement with Mexico that benefits both countries would only help that further. I'm kind of curious, we only got about a minute, 2 minutes really. What do the Mexicans think of Trump on a personal level?
Actually, Roger, this isn't covered enough, and thanks to your show and your reach and your platform, I think we can get this out there. Mexicans love President Donald Trump. Why? Because when he closed the southern border, what did that do on the Mexican side? It caused the cartels to disperse. So communities along the Mexican border on the Mexican side, they were being tormented and terrorized by cartels. Their communities, their restaurants, their playgrounds, their streets were infiltrated by the cartels because of Joe Biden's open border policy. But when President Trump closed that border, the cartel left. And so they're relieved. They feel safe again. And so the thought there in Mexico, and I spent 4 days there, the thought regarding President Trump is they're grateful for his leadership, and they're grateful that he's going after the cartels.
All right, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. I want to urge you to go to the IllinoisReview.com, IllinoisReview.com, and you can get all the latest on what's going on in Chicago, which seems to be ground zero of this leftist insurrection against ICE agents as they merely seek to carry out their responsibilities of deploying and executing the largest single deportation of dangerous illegal criminals. Mark, thanks for joining us today in the Stone Zone. And to our listeners, until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?